every time you get into that cycle, it becomes a loop. Every time you get into a same set of circumstances or circumstances that are familiar of that first time, whatever path you took, whether it be right, wrong, toxic, or otherwise, whatever path you took initially for the first time, the next set of facts, when you go down that path again, you'll go down that same like toxic, good, bad, or whatever path that you created. Welcome back to Butterfly Season. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. And at this point, this podcast has become like a mini diary, if you will. So I want to talk to you about what came up for me this week around risk taking. And really what came from it was feeling unmotivated for a while. And I was digging deeper into like what that really means or why I feel that way, because the way like life was lining up, there was really no reason to not feel motivated. The things that once inspired me kind of didn't, and I was just feeling like I was in a little bit of a lull. And I was out with a friend, and my friend was like, do you feel like you're just like playing small? And for a while I felt like that was kind of like a affirmation that people needed to say to affirm themselves in doing things bigger. Like I was playing small, so I decided to do something that maybe felt like different for them on the outside or how people perceive them to be. I never really correlated what the root of playing small was. And so I guess before I thought it was maybe there's like some sense of like insecurity or lack of confidence. And that's probably true, and it could be true for some people, but for me, I just really didn't see the connection, and I never felt like, hey, I'm playing small here by being unmotivated. And now, what I want to chat with you guys, and I will land this plane and it will make sense, is how we learn things. Think about like the neural pathways in our brain. All of them are formed as we begin to learn new things. And so think of it like sledding. I guess sledding works. Sledding, snowboarding, skiing down a hill or a mountain, right? For the first time in the first like drop of snow, whoever goes down first, whatever like path it creates, it's much easier for the person behind them to like also go down that path because the path is already carved out for them. And so that is my understanding of how neural pathways work. And so think about that as it relates to patterns and behaviors. So if you have a pattern or behavior, every time you get into that cycle, it becomes a loop. Every time you get into a same set of circumstances or circumstances that are familiar of that first time, whatever path you took, whether it be right, wrong, toxic, or otherwise, whatever path you took initially for the first time, the next set of facts, when you go down that path again, you'll go down that same like toxic, good, bad, or whatever path that you created. Now, for me, what I realized was that there has been a time in my life where I felt as if I wasn't supposed to take risks, that risks didn't necessarily equate to me feeling loved. And this is by like my upbringing and childhood, right? And so with that conditioning, with me going down the hill with that first frame of mind, when it comes to taking risks, you don't take them. And somehow I've equated that to meaning love, right? Like experiences are just experiences, and whatever meaning we assign to those experiences is how it like manifests in our life. So for me, risk taking meant it didn't equal love. And so when it comes to taking risks right now, I'm in a season of shifting a few things or really leaning into shifts that I created last year. And it's the same, but it's new for me. And because my first time going down the hill was that if you take risks, that doesn't equate to you being loved, unmotivation is just a manifestation of trying to protect myself from taking risks. Does that make sense? So a symptom of playing small, if you will, is me feeling unmotivated, because that's my brain creating a feeling to protect myself from acting on risks. And so I'm highlighting this for you guys so that you can kind of take a step back and see, where am I in a loop? Where have I continued to go down this hill, if you will, down the same path that I took that was toxic, and I'm stuck repeating this cycle of thought or this cycle of behavior, and try to make sense of it so that you can kind of undo that pattern and create your own healthy pattern. So for me, my undoing was like, okay, well, unpacking risks, right? Like, are all risks bad? No. Like, you can take a risk on something, and even though the word risk feels risky, right? It feels like unsure, maybe unstable, unbalanced, whatever. But if all risks aren't bad, then I asked myself, like, what's the consequence of not taking a risk? And what came up for me was like, okay, well, there's personal development that comes in risk taking, whether or not you get the return that you're looking for on your risks or not, right? There's growth in trying something new or pushing yourself past a point, right? Like, we can list this laundry list of things that we can benefit from risk taking, but also on the contrary, like, you can take a risk that maybe isn't, I guess, a healthy risk, right? Like, you can have risks just generally, then you have maybe good risks or perceived good risks and perceived bad risks. And I'm sure the spectrum of that maybe is your risk tolerance, whether or not you are tolerant to taking risks. And we talked about this on the podcast with Lindsay Schwartz, so I would listen to that one in addition to this one. But we also talked about it on the podcast with Keisha about dropping small deposits of trust within yourself to create like a larger bucket of proof that you can do a thing. And I think that helps with the risk tolerance. So if you see what a little bit of risk will do, a little bit of pressure, a little bit of healthy planning around your risk taking, then I think that you can build a tolerance for risk. But I want to talk about healthy risks. And I looked up the definition because I'm like, what is a healthy risk? Because it feels a little bit subjective. And what I found was that a healthy risk is a calculated and a well-informed risk that has potential to bring a positive outcome, while at the same time acknowledging and being prepared for the potential negative consequences. So you have to assess the benefits and the drawbacks and take steps to minimize negative impact. That is a healthy risk. And like an example of that would be trying a new activity or a hobby that challenges you physically or mentally, right? And like rock climbing, if you will. And there's so many beautiful lessons in trying something new. I was in a mastermind. I'm still in this mastermind, but a few years ago we did a rock climbing exercise, and like it was legitimate rock climbing, like not cinchy. Like if you didn't clip your clips in the rope on the rock, like you would fall and hurt yourself really badly, if not die. And so I realized that in those circumstances, for me to thrive, I have to either go first or be one of the first people, because that allows me to kind of run my own race, if you will. I'm not like looking at someone ahead of me and saying either how good or how bad they're doing and letting that determine how I will do. I'm just kind of figuring it out as I go and trusting myself. And so me realizing that was me taking that risk. And then by virtue of taking that risk, I realized a thing about myself. It's a small deposit, right? So that next time I go into doing a thing that maybe feels a little bit risky or similarly, that's how I would approach it. It was in another mastermind. It was Lindsay Schwartz's mastermind. And we did it was like, I don't even know what it was. It was like a jungle gym, but up in the trees. Like we were in Flagstaff, and they're evergreen trees that have been there for like hundreds of years. And literally this obstacle course is up in the trees. Like there's nothing at the bottom. So you're like having to walk like on a tightrope, and then you're having to like climb a rope or like swing one rope to the next tree and try to catch. Like it starts off easy, but it gets progressively hard. And I had never done anything like that. I'm not scared of heights, but Like some things are just like inherently maybe a little scary. And because I took a risk in the rock climbing to just like go first and get it out of the way, I realized something about myself that really set me up for this next excursion activity, if you will, that I did a few years later. So that's an example, I would say, of a healthy risk, pursuing new opportunities for personal growth. So many times we just count ourselves out of something because we're scared or we don't even want to touch what the rejection might feel like if it doesn't work out. And so pursuing those new opportunities in different areas is just evidence that like you are resilient and you can do it. So anyways, that is healthy risk taking. And another thing that helped me, how should I unpack this? With respect to healthy risks, not in the activity sense, like that felt really easy for me and that might feel hard for you. But right now where I'm feeling a tension is in the career, personal growth, like that is where I'm feeling unmotivated, but I know that that's me not wanting to put myself out there or take a risk on betting on myself. And so I know that in the past I've used baselines or I've used like an outline, if you will, to kind of help like ground me or redirect me to what my goal is for myself personally, professionally. And that was creating a baseline for healthy risks. And that's with my value statement. And I'm not sure if I talked about this on the podcast quite yet. It might have been in our New Year's episode about like New Year, New You, and like how to really set yourself up for success. But this value statement exercise has really been like imperative to my growth and helping me decide what's true for me. And that is something that I'm working toward. I talked about this earlier on the podcast about self and how that's my word of the year, is really just like knowing and trusting myself intrinsically, not like the perceived self. And so the value statement's helpful. So what I do is I write down like core values, just generally values that I want to embody, list them all out in an exhaustive list. And then sometimes there's duplicates, so you can like phase 2 would be crossing out the duplicates or the words that kind of mean the same thing. And then when you have those, write out a sentence of like what that means for you. So one of my core values is gratitude. Well, what does that mean for me? That means that I am thankful for everything, the good and the bad, because all of it is working for my good. And then another one is giving, right? Like I want to be able to give time, money, or otherwise resources to other people, not with expecting anything back, but just because that is a value of mine. Now, when you write out a sentence for each one of those, then you cross-reference to see if any are conflicting. And some of them could be like, I like to have fun, but if fun includes doing drugs, and another one is I want to be successful, and if doing drugs prohibits you from being successful, then those are conflicting, right? But that's something that only you would be able to know. And I'm giving an extreme example just because for some people it might be true, but then also you can kind of see what I mean when values are conflicting and how I want you to figure out how to make all your values cohesive. Now, after they're all cohesive, then I use every statement that I created in each value, and I draft like an overall statement as if it is the present. So for some of them, like if you have big goals and dreams around business or personal growth or whatever, and it's not quite there yet, I write that statement as if it is there. And so I read that to myself every morning or every night. And the reason why that's helpful when it comes to taking risks is because then you can go back and say, if you feel like, hey, should I do this? Should I not do this? Am I playing small here? Or is this something that will really push me? You can look back at your value statement and see if it's in alignment or not. And so one way that this kind of showed up for me last year, and I didn't quite realize it at the time, but in hindsight, I'm understanding it a lot better now. Integrity was my word for last year. And so there were risks that I could take that may not be in integrity. And when looking back at my value statement or even my word of the year, yeah, I can take this risk, but is this integrity with goals I have for myself? Is this integrity with commitments that I've made? Is this an integrity with how I want to show up, right? Like there's so many things that you can unpack when looking at your value statement and the risks that you are taking. And to me, that is how to practically implement healthy risk taking. So yeah, that is, I would say, the baseline. That is where you find your baseline. And I want to give you guys some takeaways to be able to ask yourself, or even poke and prod where you might also be playing small. Like myself, I thought unmotivation was like, I don't know, it was like, am I depressed? Like, what's going on? Like, why do I not feel motivated in the same way that I did before? Like, what is actually happening? I created this whole plan and got to a point, I was so motivated, so excited to execute, and then boom, motivation just gone, right? So I want you guys to kind of take inventory of your realities right now. Are you playing small currently? And if so, where? For me, it was putting myself out there was what I was really afraid of. I was really afraid of. And so I encourage you to ask yourself these questions. Like, if I'm playing small, why? Like, let's get down to the root of it. When you shine a light on some of these like feelings that come from being scared or not enough, when you shine a light on them, you take the power away. And so questions you can ask is, where am I playing small? For me, it was putting myself out there, being vulnerable, even like a lot of this podcast, putting myself out there, having real authentic conversations with you that aren't just about like fluff, but are also things that I'm really going through, because I'm like, hey, like we can go through this together. That's being vulnerable and being the face of things. And it's not that I don't want to, it's that I was conditioned to think that when you take risks, you're not shown love, right? But we know now that that's not true. And so it's me, just like this podcast, for example, is putting a small deposit, a small drop in my bucket of trust within myself that like I can show up and be authentically me and still be loved. And so, yeah, recognizing that those risks make me feel vulnerable, but they're healthy. And when I'm cross-referencing that with my value statement currently, or even my word of the year self, I am in alignment with that by doing this. So evaluate things when things feel risky to determine whether or not you should take those risks. And here are some 3 questions that you can ask yourself. One is, what are the potential benefits and drawbacks of this decision? For me, the benefit of showing up and being vulnerable is that I can have more authentic conversations and create more change with people that are actually listening. Overall, to be able to help somebody else through my story, I feel like is a part of my purpose, my mission. So there's benefits there. Drawbacks is I might be judged. Somebody might use my vulnerabilities against me, right? But that's okay. Like, that's not enough to shake the foundation of what I've created / am creating. Another one is, have I done my research and fully considered the possible outcomes? So sometimes we kind of jump into things too quickly and you don't research it and you're in it and you're like, oh my God, this isn't something that I wanted to do. But that's a two-sided coin, because I feel like if we knew everything that it entailed to like kind of execute on some things, would we even continue with it? Like, there's this beauty in being naive in some instances, but you know you. So ask yourself that question honestly and determine if there are outcomes that you're not considering. The third part is, what measures can I take to minimize any negative consequences? We've been referring to me. I've been using me as an example, really. And for here, measures that I can take that I've consciously taken to minimize any negative consequences is, I'm not going to bring something to the table that I don't feel like I've worked through fully to have a constructive conversation. And I say that because, like, I think back to like high school and MySpace, even high school on Twitter. Like, I commend like people in high school currently that are living in this age of social media, because I probably would have been canceled. I probably would have been God knows what. Like, I would just rage post, like not having a care in the world. I think really scientifically, if your frontal lobe is not fully developed, or it's not if your frontal lobe as an adolescent is not fully developed. And so that part of your brain is where you understand like consequences. And when you don't fully understand consequences, you just act reckless. So I was reckless 100%. So basically for me now, it's like to minimize that, is to think about the consequences and some of the things that I'm saying. If I'm not truly like feeling confident that I can give a resource or feedback to support you also in your journey of listening to this podcast. And it's probably not best to be said right now. I think that there's a little bit of danger or a lot of bit of danger in like trauma dumping. And I never want to show up that way for you guys. So that's a measure that I could take for me if I'm using just me as an example. But all in all, by asking these questions, I just want you guys to gain a bit of a better understanding on risk taking and whether or not it's healthy. And it could also kind of help you identify any potential red flags and make more informed decisions on your future. It's been helping me right now. It's been working really well for me in this like journey of self-discovery and understanding who I like intrinsically am in my soul. So I hope it helps. Take with you what feels good and let me know how it goes. If you loved this episode, found it helpful at all, post about it online, tag me. I would love to go through this journey with you and just kind of like build you up in all of the things. But other than that, until next time, guys.